let's jump into item 3 here. I'm going to share some quick slides, and I'm going to give a really quick high-level overview of some of the changes that went on earlier this year that kind of snuck in during reporting, and what are some of the impacts that it could have on the facilities here in Wisconsin. Renee or anyone else, if you hear me say something incorrectly, because the last time I looked into this and updated this was back in middle of February. So if there's been any updates since then, feel free to interrupt me at any point and make those corrections. So for those of you that know, or maybe those of you that don't know, on February 7th of 2024, the US EPA updated the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for particulate matter, PM2.5. NAAQS, as we call it, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, are standards EPA sets in place for 6 criteria pollutants. I hope I can get these right. Nitrogen oxide, CO, SO2, lead, ozone, forgetting the 6th. Oh man, well, you can look it up on Google. Particulate matter, did I say particulate matter? Anyways, EPA sets primary standards. Those are to protect the public health, and then EPA also sets secondary standards to protect the public welfare. So what EPA has done on February 7th is they updated the PM2.5 NAAQS. They lower it from 12 micrograms per cubic meter down to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. They did not update the primary and secondary 24-hour PM2.5 standard. This is for the annual, and they didn't update the PM10 standard. Something here shown in the picture to the right is actually, I believe, all the monitoring locations the Wisconsin DNR has set up for PM2.5. So we'll touch base on that in a little bit here. Here's some design values. All of this is publicly available information on the Wisconsin DNR Air Quality Monitoring website. So what we saw earlier in the prior slide was the monitoring locations for PM2.5. Here's the values that are obtained from those monitoring locations. This is specific to the Southeast region. Next slide will be the inland region. But you can see the black dashed line is the NAAQS, right? For PM2.5 annual. So it used to be 15. It got decreased down to 12. And then now it's going to get decreased down to 9. So you can see there are a couple monitoring locations that are currently above that new standard. Milwaukee and Waukesha, I believe. So if you're located in those counties, this could have a potential big impact on you, and you should really pay attention. If you're outside of these counties, it's good to know what's going on, because depending on how the other counties are redesignated, it could have impact on you as well. I don't know why these values trended down and then are trending back up. So don't ask me. These are the design values from the inland region. And currently, as these stand, they're all under the updated 9 micrograms per meter cubed standard that EPA has put in place. So the important question: how is this going to impact facilities in Wisconsin? There's two items we're going to look at. One's going to be air dispersion modeling, and the other is going to be attainment of certain areas, attainment status. So let's start off with air dispersion modeling. I know this is a bit wordy, but there's a lot of good information on here. And this first excerpt is actually, I think, pulled straight from the DNR guidance. But long story short, well, let's jump back here. Air dispersion modeling. What is air dispersion modeling? I'm going to read you an excerpt directly from the EPA website. It says dispersion modeling uses mathematical formulations to characterize the atmospheric process that disperse a pollutant emitted by a source. That is a mouthful. What it's basically doing is it's taking all your emission sources from your facility that are significant, modeling the potential emissions, in this case PM2.5, and determining whether or not you exceed or can cause an exceedance of the NACs. So the DNR uses this tool to determine whether or not you will meet this new PM2.5 standard. You can see an output of the model down below. I believe that's from Lakes Environmental, and I believe that's for PM2.5. But what sources are actually modeled against PM2.5 in Wisconsin? This is specific to Wisconsin. The DNR has some pretty excellent modeling guidance out there that you can find if you just Google it. But they've determined that existing sources, minor sources, and minor modifications of sources do not cause or exacerbate a violation of the PM2.5 standard. So if you are an existing source, a minor source, or a minor modification, you do not have to model against PM2.5. And last I spoke with the DNR, they will continue to use that assumption going forward. So for a lot of people on this call, you're probably not a major source for non-attainment area. And we'll go into that a little bit. So you're more than likely not going to have to model against PM2.5. But let's say for some reason you do trigger modeling for PM2.5. One, I wish you luck, because it is exceptionally difficult to model against PM2.5. Even against the old standard, I ran into a lot of issues. With this new standard, it's going to be even harder. However, the DNR will not model against this new standard until they incorporate it into NR 404. That contains the National Ambient Air Quality Standards in the Wisconsin Administrative Code. And that will take a couple years before they can do that. So you have a couple years before you're going to have to model against PM2.5 if you are required to. The DNR, last I spoke with them, will not retroactively model major sources against this standard. So that's dispersion modeling. Let's get into what will potentially impact actually a lot of facilities. And that'll be redesignation of attainment areas. So what Wisconsin DNR does is they take the results from those monitoring locations that we saw earlier, and they use those results to determine whether or not a specific area is in attainment with the NACs standard. And if it's not in attainment, that area, and it's usually along county lines, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes they'll draw it along road lines. The Wisconsin DNR's got a great map out there right now that shows attainment areas. But if it's not in attainment with those standards, it'll be a non-attainment area. And that triggers a whole slew of different requirements. Now, The DNR or EPA is going to be looking through the air monitoring concentrations from 2022 to 2024 when they make a determination against this new PM 2.5 standard. So we still got to get through 2024, gather that data before the DNR and EPA are going to look at a specific area and say whether it is or isn't in attainment with that new standard. So we're looking at late 2025 into early 2026 before we'll see counties or areas redesignated as non-attainment. Currently, they're all in attainment. We may see a few, specifically Milwaukee and Waukesha, redesignated as non-attainment in late 2025 or early 2026. Now, there is one caveat. We have been getting a lot of smoke from those Canadian fires up north. Wisconsin DNR is currently working with EPA to exclude that data under exceptional event. Because if DNR has to include that data, I think virtually every single county in Wisconsin is going to be non-attainment, which could have huge implications. So last I heard, EPA hasn't excluded it yet. But from those I talked to, I believe EPA should. They approve these exceptional events out east and out west due to fires. So I think they should approve it in this case because of those Canadian fires. So just keep an eye on that. So to summarize, come late 2025 or early 2026, you're more than likely going to see Milwaukee or Waukesha County designated as non-attainment. If the DNR cannot get the monitoring data from those Canadian fires excluded, you're more than likely going to see virtually every single county to some degree designated as non-attainment. So if your county is redesignated as non-attainment, what does that mean? Well, in order to remain a minor source, you're going to have to limit your emissions. You're going to have to limit it to 100 tons per year for PM 2.5, that's what the standard's for, but then also for precursors of PM 2.5. And the precursors are SO2 and nitrogen oxide. So those two get lumped into that 100 ton per year limit. So if you have emissions that are above SO2, or if you have SO2 emissions, NOx, and PM 2.5 emissions that are above 100 tons per year, you're a major source. So what does that mean for expansions going forward? Well, if you have an expansion at a major source that triggers new source review, you have to apply the 3 criteria listed on the bottom of this slide. Now, what is new source review? What is triggering major modification under new source review? Well, if the emissions from your project exceed 10 tons per year for PM 2.5, 40 tons per year for sulfur, or 40 tons per year for nitrogen oxide, then you trigger a major modification. And you have to apply latest achievable emission rate, which is a control device that you have to install, more than likely, without taking into consideration cost of the control device. You have to purchase emission offset credits, which I don't think there's any that exist right now, because emission offset credits can only be generated in a non-attainment area, and currently there's no PM 2.5 non-attainment areas, so none exist. And then there's an opportunity for public involvement. So takeaway from this is suggestion going forward. If you're in a non-attainment area, which, like I said, will more than likely be Milwaukee or Waukesha, really think about limiting your emissions below 100 tons per year for SO2, NOx, and PM 2.5 if that's available to you. And then if you don't have that option available to you, really, you kind of really have to limit the emissions from any expansion going forward to less than the thresholds listed on the bottom of this page, because you're not going to be able to purchase emission offset credits. You're going to have to do those internally somehow, decommission a source probably. Now, just a quick note, the thresholds I listed on here are for, I think, marginal non-attainment. There's different designations depending on where the ambient air monitors fall in terms of the values. Those could degrade even further, and you could see these thresholds get notched down. So for serious non-attainment areas, you'll see the threshold change from 100 tons per year to 75 tons per year. So, summary. For most of you, like I said, air dispersion modeling is not going to really have an impact because a lot of you don't have to model against the new standard. If you think you're a major source or you have a major modification, and when I say major source, I'm talking about non-attainment, not Part 70. Take a look at the Wisconsin DNR guidelines, or feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions and I can help you walk through those. What's really going to impact people is this redesignation, right? So keep an eye out late 2025 or early 2026. Say, hey, where's my facility located? Am I in an area that's going to be non-attainment? And if so, what can I do going forward? Well, what you can do is revisit your sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and PM2.5 emission factors, right? Make sure that the emission factors you're currently using to estimate emissions are accurate for that particular process. I see a lot of times people really overestimate PM2.5 emissions. They'll assume that their PM2.5 emissions are equal to PM emissions, which is generally a very high overassumption. Wisconsin DNR also has made a determination that PM2.5 emissions are only generated from high temperature sources. So if you have a low temperature source, maybe think about excluding those PM2.5 emissions. So that's the first item that's suggested. I can't stress that enough. I've seen facilities forego major modifications. I've seen facilities pass modeling just by looking at their emission factors and making sure they're actually representative of the processes themselves. Second is if you have any major expansions and you're located in Milwaukee or Waukesha, think about maybe possibly permitting those major expansions now. Because when the county's redesignated in late 2025 or early 2026, it could be a lot harder to permit those major expansions. And then, yeah, just really keep an eye on whether or not EPA approves those exceptional events, right? Because if they don't approve the exceptional event for those Canadian fires, well, then we're not just talking about Milwaukee and Waukesha County. We're talking about a lot of the counties in southern Wisconsin that are going to be impacted by this. So I know I threw a lot at everyone. I know air can be complicated. I'm sure I used a lot of acronyms throughout that I didn't realize I was using. So are there any questions at this point about what I just threw at you? Renee, did I get everything correctly?
I did not hear anything I would, say anything different about. So
Okay.
I think you've got it. One thing I was going to suggest, you mentioned that DNR's got the map of the non-attainment areas. That is an interactive map. So and they are going to update it as soon as they know that they've got new county designations coming. They're going to update that web page. So that's an easy way to kind of monitor what's going on in your area.
Yeah, this is a great tool, by the way. I just Googled non-attainment areas in Wisconsin. It's the first thing that comes up on Google, and it's going to list all the areas that are currently in non-attainment. And you can zoom in, you can poke around. It's got a great legend. It's got some info based on permitting. You know, it goes over some of those thresholds I mentioned. If you click on a specific region, it'll list the thresholds, the emission offset credits, and so forth. So great tool that the Wisconsin DNR has put together there.